Hi, I'm Captain Frank Altieri, T-37 instructor pilot at Randolph Air Force Base. The program you're watching today is designed to take you through the checklist procedures of the T-37. The program has been divided into two 30-minute videos and covers a lot of material, so feel free to take a break if you need to. To get the most out of this program, you should have your checklist out and follow along as we go through the interior inspection, engine start, before taxiing check, in-flight checks, and post-flight checks. All warnings from the Dash 1 will be mentioned, however most cautions and notes will not. Keep in mind there are several techniques for checklist use. You may either preview several items and then accomplish them, check each item as it is accomplished, or review the checklist after accomplishing several items. If you have any questions on anything you see today, you may review the program again, either in the Learning Center or by checking it out and taking it home. If you still have questions after that, get with your IP and good luck as you begin the T-37 phase of your training. This program will take you through the interior inspection, explaining how to accomplish the checks listed in your T-37 checklist. After you complete the exterior inspection, go ahead and strap in as you were taught in aviation physiology. Then get your checklist out so you can refer directly to it as you complete the check. The first item is control lock stowed. Swing it down and stow it as shown here. Make certain the control lock pin is secure in the locking bracket. Next, you should ensure you brought the required pubs for your flight on board the aircraft. They should be stowed in the map compartment in the center console. Lock the door after checking them. The third item directs you to check your survival kit. This is not normally used at pilot training bases, but if it is, the Dash 1 warns that it be connected to the parachute harness prior to fastening the lap belt, and the straps be routed under and not over or through the lap belt. Failure to properly route or tighten the straps could result in injury or seat-man-chute entanglement during ejection sequence. A more commonly used survival kit is the PSK, Personal Survival Kit. When using a PSK, ensure that it is attached correctly prior to strapping in your parachute. The next item directs you to check your leg and chest straps, safety belt, and shoulder harness to be sure you're strapped in properly, with zero delay and gold key connected. Your zippers should be closed, and make sure the emergency oxygen cylinder is connected. Check that your helmet chin strap is fastened and adjusted to snug fit under your chin. Challenge your IP to also check these items listed in Step 4 of the checklist. Many IPs prefer that you wait until the battery is on to accomplish the challenge and response items, so you can use the interphone to talk. At this point, there is a warning we need to address. Improper routing of personal leads may cause inadvertent opening of the safety belt latch during ejection. To permit clean separation from the seat during ejection, the parachute arming lanyard, commonly referred to as the gold key, must be outside the parachute harness and not caught on any equipment. Also, you should connect, release, and reconnect the safety belt to ensure proper operation. Now check for positive locking of the belt by pulling up on the silver portion of the manual release handle without depressing the black portion of the handle. Now you're ready to check for proper seat adjustment. Each time you fly, your position in the aircraft should be the same. Your instructor will give you references you can use to adjust your seat to the same height for each flight. To adjust the seat, first ensure that the hand grip safety pin is installed. Then check that the area underneath the seat is clear of obstructions. If an object was left under a hand grip, inadvertent movement could result when the seat is lowered. To actually adjust the seat, lift up on this lever and allow the seat to move up and down on the rails by putting more or less weight on the seat. Use your legs to support your body weight in the seat, and then lower the lever when you're in the proper position. Here's another warning. After adjusting the seat to the proper height, check that the seat catches are engaged. If the seat is not locked, G-loads in flight may cause it to move or prevent a safe ejection. Jiggle your seat up and down while simultaneously holding down on the adjustment lever to assure yourself it is locked in position. Next, adjust the rudder pedals. When you rotate the rudder pedal crank, it causes the pedals to move closer or further away depending on which way you crank it. The rudder pedals should be in a position that will allow full rudder travel without having to completely extend your leg. With full rudder pedal travel, you should have a slight bend in your leg. Next, you'll check the flight controls. Be careful as you check the flight controls for free and proper movement, or you could bang the eyepiece knee with the stick. So before you begin moving the stick around, advise your instructor to keep their knees clear. Push the stick to the left and check the left aileron. It should be up. Then check the right aileron. It should be down. Push the stick to the right. Check the right aileron. It should be up. The left aileron should be down. Now pull the stick back and look over your left shoulder. The trailing edge of the horizontal stabilizer should come up with the control stick pulled back. If you can't see the trailing edge, check the position of the elevator horn on the outside of the horizontal stabilizer. It should be down. Finally, push the stick forward. The trailing edge should go down. Next, while you're still looking back, check the rudder. Push the left rudder pedal. The trailing edge of the rudder will move toward your left. Push the right rudder pedal, and you will get the opposite effect on the rudder. Remember, it is extremely important to check the flight controls completely and thoroughly each time you fly. Moving along in the checklist, the speed brake switch is next. Your speed brake switch should be in the in position for all ground operations. Next, check the eyepiece speed brake. Reach over and check that it's in the solo position. This is a 3-position switch, and the solo position is in the center. With the eyepiece switch in this position, you control the speed brake with the switch on your throttle. Next, you will adjust 2 air vents. Just turn them to control the amount of airflow. Normally direct the vents at yourself for maximum comfort. However, during times of high humidity, you might get a stream of water blown on you. For those of you that like to accomplish several items at a time, this is a good point to stop and reference your checklist for accuracy. The next few items of your checklist take you across the instrument panel from left to right. Check the landing and taxi light switch off. The IFF antenna should be in the auto position. Just above the RMI is the heading indicator slaving switch. It has 3 positions, out, in, and fast. Check that it is in the in position. Ensure the ARU-44A attitude indicator is caged and locked. Then come down to the vertical velocity indicator. Check that the VVI reads 0. If it doesn't, gently tap on the instrument to be sure it is not stuck. Set and wind the clock. Be careful not to overwind it. Next, your checklist directs you to give a firm push on the fuel shutoff T-handles to ensure they are not pulled out. When they are in the out position, they are only out about a ½ an inch, so it may be difficult to detect it visually. The fuel system switch can be placed in emergency position by pulling the red guard away from the toggle switch and pushing down on the switch. Next, check that the defrost knob is all the way in if you won't be needing it. To reset the accelerometer, just push the reset button in the lower left corner and it will return your accelerometer needle to 1G. Now check that the IFF, UHF, VOR, ILS, and DME are all off. There are 3 things you need to do with the air conditioner at this point. Pull the air lever out to vent position. Place the air temperature control switch to automatic, and finally set the temperature control rheostat as desired for your comfort. Next, check the circuit breakers. From your position, there are several circuit breakers hidden by the airspeed and turn and slip indicators. You will need to reach over and physically confirm that these circuit breakers are in. The ARU-42A attitude indicator should be caged and locked. Moving along to the next few items in the checklist, check the fuel boost pump switch off, the inverter switch off, and the generator switches on and the red switch guard closed. The pitot heat switch is next. It should be turned off. Another warning that needs to be mentioned is that failure to accomplish this step can result in severe burns to the crew chief. Next on the checklist is check the throttles in cutoff. As a technique, lift up and pull back on your eyepiece throttles to ensure they are in the cutoff position. Now you are ready to complete your oxygen system price check. Hook up your mask and perform a pressure check on the oxygen regulator. First, you should select 100% oxygen with the diluter lever and place the emergency lever to the emergency position. Take a deep breath and hold it. Then determine if there are any leaks in the mask or oxygen system. If your mask doesn't fit properly or is not tight enough, you'll feel oxygen escaping from around the edges. The blinker on the oxygen regulator will indicate if there is a flow. If you are holding your breath, it should not indicate any flow at all. Now return the emergency lever to the normal setting and exhale to check the exhalation valve in your mask. Finally, with the diluter lever still in the 100% position, take a few short breaths and check the blinker for normal operation. Return the diluter level to the normal position. Remember, the oxygen system check is a challenge and response item, so challenge your instructor. Next, you will set up the interphone panel. Normally, the rotary switch is in the COM inner position with all the toggle switches outboard. Now you're ready to apply electrical power to the aircraft. Normally, your battery will provide sufficient power and should be placed on at this point if the APU is not used. If auxiliary power is used, the battery switch must be turned off or damage to the battery will result. Moving on in the checklist, the pitot heat will be checked in coordination with the crew chief. This is accomplished by turning on the pitot heat switch to the on position while the crew chief checks the heating system. They'll check the pitot tube and transducer vane on the left wing. When you receive a confirmation that the system checks OK, return the switch to the off position. The next item of your checklist directs you to check the inverter. Check that the main and spare inverters are working by first turning on the spare inverter and then the main. You can hear the spare inverter when it comes on, however you won't be able to hear the main. A later step in the checklist will require the inverter to be on for at least 1 minute. As a technique, hack the clock at this point in your interior checks. As a technique, look for movement in the fuel quantity gauge to confirm AC power is available. It may take 5 to 10 seconds before the pointer begins to move. The next item in the checklist directs you to set the interior lights as required. In the daytime, you normally don't use the interior lights, so turn them off. This is the radio lights rheostat. These two rheostats located on the center console control lighting for your primary instruments. The last rheostat is located on the rear portion of the center console and controls the intensity of floodlights located underneath the glare shield. Two lights that are often overlooked are the map lights. Be sure that yours is off and ask your instructor to check that theirs is off too. Next, check the emergency canopy control switch. Located on the center console, it is safety wired closed. The next checklist item concerns the exterior lights. Prior to starting the engines, the position light switch must be set to the position light only, as required by Air Force Regulation 6016. The anti-collision beacon switch should be off. Continuing on, reconfirm that both landing gear levers are down. Never pull up on the handles while the aircraft is on the ground. Push the landing gear warning lights test switch and check that the red warning light comes on in both gear handles. With the warning light switch depressed, place each throttle in idle one at a time. The gear warning horn should sound. Some IPs also like to check each throttle past 70% region to ensure the warning horn goes out. Moving on, the landing gear position indicator lights are shown here. They should be on to indicate that all 3 gear are down and locked. Next on the checklist, the fuel boost pump warning light should be on since the boost pump switch is off. Next, check the trim operation by actuating the trim button. The elevator trim is set for takeoff when the green light is on. Click the trim out of the green and then back again. Now look at your left aileron to see if the aileron trim tab is in the neutral position. You also need to check its operation. Even though the canopy is up at this point, the canopy not locked warning light will be off because the canopy downlock handle is in the forward position. Make sure the canopy rails are clear and then move the downlock handle aft to the unlocked position. Check that the warning light illuminates. Motor the canopy down briefly with the internal canopy control switch to ensure proper operation of the canopy motor. Press the engine ice warning light to test the bulb. Next, test the fire detect system. The button on the left side of the T-handles tests the fire detect circuit. Press it and a steady red light should come on in each of the fuel shutoff T-handles. The button on the right side of the T-handles tests the engine overheat circuit. When you press it, the red lights blink on and off in each T-handle. The fuel low-level warning light is next. Press to test the light as you did the others. Next, check to see if the gravity fuel light is on. It should be because the fuel system switch is in the emergency position. Drop down to the fuel quantity gauge to check the fuel quantity. Note that the fuel gauge has a 3-position toggle switch. The center position shown here allows the total fuel to be read from the gauge. Total fuel in the aircraft is 2,008.5 pounds. However, the fuel gauge will normally indicate only about 1,800 pounds of fuel. Your primary attitude indicator is the ARU-44A. After 60 seconds of energizing, uncage the attitude indicator by pulling out and rotating the caging knob counterclockwise and then release it gently. Adjust the miniature aircraft to coincide with the horizon bar. Your standby attitude indicator is the ARU-42A. It should be uncaged and adjusted in the same manner as the ARU-44A. Now you are ready to check the wing fuel balance. Manually position the switch either right or left and then release it. This allows the fuel quantity needle to wind down and register the level of fuel in the wing tank selected. Now check the other side. If there is a fuel imbalance between the wing tanks of more than 160 pounds, don't take the aircraft. Always reposition the toggle switch to the center position after a fuel quantity check. This will avoid misinterpretation of a low fuel state during subsequent fuel checks. The final item of your interior check concerns stowing all loose items. This is a good time to confirm the gear pins, pubs, and Form 781 are stowed. Check that there is nothing that could fly out of the cockpit and into the intakes during engine start. You're now ready to start the engines. Prior to starting the engines, you need to check for several things. Ensure a fire bottle is immediately available and ensure that refueling operations are not being conducted within 50 feet. Clear the engine intake, check for the crew chief, and signal for starting prior to engaging the starter switch. Place the fuel boost pump switch to the on position. If the boost pump light does not go off, abort the aircraft and note the discrepancy on the Form 781. First, let's start the left engine. Use your instructor's throttle for starting so that the cutoff feature is available if shutdown is necessary. Place the starter switch in the ground or up position. Next, at 5% RPM, place the ignition switch in the on position. At 8% RPM, move the left throttle forward past the cutoff detent to idle. Monitor the EGT gauge for temperature rise. Release the ignition switch at approximately 200 degrees and confirm that the switch returns to the off position. Release the starter switch when you see the RPM passing 25%. During start, you must monitor both the EGT and RPM gauges for limitations. Additionally, you must be alert for other indications of abnormalities such as fire lights, smoke, or crew chief signals. The EGT normally peaks as RPM reaches idle RPM, 36 to 38%. The rates of RPM and EGT increase can be compared to see if a hot start will occur. After the EGT peaks, check the engine instruments for the following indications. RPM should be in the 36 to 38% range. EGT should be in the 280 to 650 range. Fuel flow should be steady. Oil pressure steady within the 3 to 45 psi range. Hydraulic pressure should be 1250 to 1550 psi. If an APU was used for engine start, give the visual disconnect signal to the crew chief. Move the battery switch to the on position and note the jump on the left load meter if an APU was used during the start. The load meter should indicate a positive reading. If no positive reading exists, increase the RPM to a maximum of 60%. Remember, the generator cut-in speed is 38 to 42%. If by 60% RPM the load meter does not indicate a positive reading, shut down the engine and write up the discrepancy in the Form 781. Move the left throttle to 60% and monitor for appropriate reading. The procedures for starting the right engine are the same as those for the left engine. After releasing the right engine starter switch at 25%, retard the left throttle to the idle position. The right engine instrument indications are the same as those specified for the left engine instruments immediately after start. Again, the right load meter should indicate a positive reading. If no positive reading exists, use the same procedures discussed earlier. Be sure you are familiar with the cautions associated with engine starts. Once you are satisfied that the engines are operating properly, you're ready to continue with the before taxiing portion of your checklist. Open your checklist to the before taxiing check. First, return the fuel system switch to the normal position and ensure the gravity feed light goes out. Notice that the switch is covered in this position by the red switch guard. Now, place the IFF control switch to standby. Remember, the knob must be pulled out before it can be turned to standby. Turn the UHF radio on by placing the control switch to both. To turn on the VOR ILS, turn the volume control knob to the right. Place the DME selector switch to standby to warm up the AVQ 75 model. There is no warm-up time required for the newer AN/ARN 154 DME. You can turn it on directly to the on position. Push the cockpit air lever into air condition. Your next step is to check the operation of the speed brake and thrust attenuators. First, give the speed brake signal to the crew chief. The crew chief will clear the area around your speed brake and return the signal. Now place the speed brake switch to the out position. The crew chief will verify that the speed brake and both thrust attenuators have extended. Then return the switch to the in position. In the cockpit, you can monitor the hydraulic pressure drop as the speed brake extends and retracts. Be sure the pressure returns to the normal operating range at the completion of both the extension and retraction cycles. The crew chief will give the OK signal if the speed brake and thrust attenuator operation was normal. Next, the flap and spoiler operation check begins when you give the crew chief this signal. As with the speed brake, the crew chief will return the signal when he is ready for you to lower the flaps. Place the flap lever in the full down position. The crew chief will ensure both flaps and spoilers extend. Now return the flaps full up. Once again, the crew chief will make sure the flaps and the spoilers retract normally. Finally, place the flap lever to the 50% detent. Check the flap position indicator to verify the flaps are down 50%. It is also a good idea to visually check that you have a flap down, spoiler up, and confirm this with your IP. The crew chief will give this signal when he is sure the flaps and the spoilers are working properly. Next comes the VOR ILS check. To use the self-test feature, first tune and identify a valid ILS or localizer frequency. The RMI bearing pointer should park at the 4 o'clock position with no off flags or to from indication in the CI. Also check for proper CDI deflection in relation to the aircraft position. Pressing the VOR ILS test button will illuminate the marker beacon light. Now, tune and identify a valid VOR frequency. Set 315 in the course select window and press the VOR ILS test button and hold. If the system is working properly, several things should occur here. The CDI should center plus or minus 2 degrees. The marker beacon light will illuminate, and there should be a to indication in the to from window, and the RMI bearing pointer should indicate 315 degrees. This completes the self-test of the VOR ILS system. If any part of these self-test features does not work properly, pilot discretion and command operating restrictions will be used to determine if the mission can be continued. The DME self-test feature is used to check the DME operation. Place the DME mode switch to the test position. On the older AVQ-75 DME, it is necessary to hold the switch while the DME indicator rotates to 196. The red flag should then disappear. The self-test is complete. Release the mode switch and it will automatically return to the DME position. The newer AN/ARN-154 is tested the same way, however, it is not necessary to hold the switch in the test position. Release the mode switch after turning it to test and wait for the display window to indicate if the self-test passes. Check the flight instruments next. Remember, check the instruments on the right side of the instrument panel also. You may need them as a backup. Obtain the current altimeter setting from ATIS. If ATIS isn't available, the ground controller should give you the current altimeter setting when you request a taxi. Use the barometer set knob to adjust the altimeter. The indicated altitude should be plus or minus 75 feet of ramp elevation. The airspeed indicators should be between 30 and 40 knots indicated airspeed. Now compare the headings on the RMI, J2, and magnetic compass. They should agree within plus or minus 5 degrees. Here the J2 and RMI compass is indicating 230 degrees, and the mag compass is indicating 228 degrees. Also make sure the magnetic compass is full of fluid and there are no cracks or bubbles. The last of the flight instruments is the attitude indicator. Ensure both attitude indicators are set for level flight with no off flag showing. The checklist now directs that you remove, display, and stow the ejection seat and canopy safety pins. To remove the seat pin, first place your left hand palm down on top of the left hand grip to guard it down. Then reach down with your right hand and remove the pin. Guard the left hand grip until the red streamer has cleared the seat. Now reach over and carefully remove the canopy safety pin and then display both pins to the crew chief. Stow your pins and challenge your IP to show and stow their pin also. Now check the brakes for sufficient pedal pressure by smoothly applying pressure to the top of the pedal. Challenge your IP to do the same and make sure you get the proper response. Position your taxi light as required, normally to the taxi position. Now it is time to check the operation of your UHF radio. First, dial in the ground control frequency or use the preset frequency. Then call for taxi instructions using the procedures at your base. A response to your call by ground control indicates that your radio is working properly.
Ground, Curly 29, taxi with Kilo.
Curly 29 ground, taxi to runway 22 right.
Then confirm with your instructor that their hands are clear of all controls and give the crew chief the signal to remove the chocks and you're ready to taxi. This completes the before taxi check. Next, we'll cover the taxi and before takeoff checks. Once safely clear of other aircraft, you can start the taxi check. Begin by checking the turn and slip indicator. The turn needle should indicate proper direction and the ball should have free movement in the glass tube. The heading indicator should also reflect correct movement and heading. Next, we move into the before takeoff check. Before checking the flight controls, ensure feet and knees are clear and that you disengage the nose wheel steering. You're checking for binding in flight controls. The next couple of items are challenge and response items. Visually check that your zero delay and parachute arming lanyard are connected. Also ensure that your helmet visor is in the proper position. All aircrew members must use a visor from takeoff through the 10,000 foot check and after the descent check if sufficient light is available to permit proper vision. The checklist now directs you to review the toll data, which you should have copied from the sign-out area prior to stepping. Next, we turn on the anti-collision beacon and the strobe and position lights. The defroster and cockpit temperature are next. They should be set as required. Next, the pitot heat is turned on. The VOR, ILS, and DME should be checked at this time if it wasn't already done in the before taxi check. The last item in the before takeoff check is to close and lock the canopy. Ensure that you check that the canopy rail is free of obstruction and notify your instructor. Wait for confirmation that it is clear before lowering the canopy. Once you have been cleared for takeoff, make sure the runway and final is clear of other aircraft and taxi into position on the runway and accomplish the lineup check. Initially, you will practice static takeoffs. Later, you and your IP will have the option of a rolling takeoff. Pump up the brakes and glance outside for creeping of the aircraft as you check the lineup items in the checklist. The first item is to set the IFF as required. You next check both attitude indicators for accuracy. Pushing the throttles up to military is the third step of the lineup check. Ensure the EGT doesn't exceed limitations and then continue with the remaining engine instruments. Now check that the heading indicators are within 5 degrees of runway heading. And then look over the load meters and check them for their allowable limits. Before releasing the brakes for takeoff, check that all warning lights are off. One lineup cross-check technique you'll probably be introduced to goes like this: line on line, point on point, for green, no red or amber, and 2 good engines. This ends part 1 of the checklist procedures. If there's any part that you are unclear on, go back and review that part in the video before proceeding on. We'll continue with the takeoff in part 2. Hi, I'm Captain Frank Altieri, back to talk you through the remaining checklist procedures. We'll continue with the takeoff, in-flight, and post-flight checks. As a reminder, all warnings from the Dash 1 will be addressed. However, not all cautions and notes will be covered. During most of your in-flight checks, you'll use the checklist just like you did on the ground. You may either preview the checklist before the check, reference the check item by item, or review the checklist after the check. The important thing to remember is use the checklist to ensure that all of the items are accomplished. There are some checks, however, that must be performed during critical phases of flight, that is, during the takeoff, landing, and go-around phases. During these checks, you may not have the time to refer to the checklist, so you'll have to commit these checks to memory. Now let's jump in and pick up where we left off in part 1 of this video, the takeoff. The first item that needs to be mentioned about takeoff is the warning regarding wake turbulence, something the T-37 is particularly susceptible to. Though towers should monitor spacing to avoid wake turbulence, you are ultimately responsible for the minimum 2-minute wake turbulence separation discussed in the Dash 1. After you safely lift off and confirm that you're climbing away from the ground, you can proceed with the first check, the after takeoff check. Once you're airborne, raise the gear at 100 knots minimum. Before raising the handle, make sure you're climbing away from the ground and call gear clear to your IP. When you're in the pre-solo portion of your training, your IP must acknowledge this call before you raise the gear handle. Simply raising the gear handle does not complete this step. You must continue to monitor the gear handle to ensure the red light goes out prior to 150 knots. However, you may continue with the next step while the gear are retracting. Next, as your hand leaves the gear handle, confirm the landing lights are set to either the taxi or off position. You'll normally fly with the switch in the taxi position. Since you don't change the position of this switch on most takeoffs, it's easy to get in the habit of not checking it at all. Watch out, this has caused many students to overspeed the landing lights after a touch and go from a straight-in or an instrument approach. As the jet accelerates past 110 knots, you should raise the flaps to the full up position. To be sure the flaps have fully retracted, check the flap indicator. Although the indicator only shows the position of the right flap, you can be sure both flaps are retracting if the aircraft experiences no unusual rolling tendencies. Last, you should check the engine instruments for normal operation. Your IP may suggest that you also check these instruments before you raise the gear. This will allow you more time to make an abort decision should you have an engine malfunction. You've now progressed to a point in the flight where you'll have a short break from checks. However, now is not the time to let your guard down. You'll be busy flying the departure, responding to radio calls, and clearing for other traffic while maintaining aircraft control. As you pass 10,000 feet MSL, run the operations check. The first item calls for the fuel quantity check. The total quantity, wing tank balance, and fuselage tank quantity should be checked and monitored for excessive fuel consumption. For this reason, a fuel balance check should be made between 1,600 and 1,700 pounds of fuel, regardless of whether the aircraft is on the ground or is airborne. Thereafter, the fuel balance and fuselage tank quantity should be checked at approximately 15-minute intervals. When the toggle switch is centered, the gauge shows the actual fuel on board. To check the fuel in the wings, flip the switch to the right and read the quantity. Then, do the same for the left wing. A word of caution here. You should place the toggle switch back to the center or total position. If you fail to do so, you may misinterpret your actual fuel quantity later in the flight. In addition to checking the fuel balance, you should also check that the total fuel on board is correct. Let's assume you have 550 pounds in each wing tank, adding up to 1,100 pounds total. You can safely assume the fuselage tank is a little less than completely full, so around 565.5 down to 550, and add that to the wing total. Your total on the gauge should read close to 1,650 pounds. If the total fuel is significantly less than 1,650 pounds, fuel is not flowing from the wings. Switch the fuel system to emergency and refer to your -1 for further procedures. As you're doing your in-flight checks, remember you must continue to clear for other aircraft, birds, and other hazards. A common problem you need to avoid is burying your head in the cockpit while doing a check. You've got to clear throughout each step of the checklist with only short glances inside. Continuing on with the operations check, the next two steps are challenge and response items. If your flight will exceed 10,000 feet for a prolonged period, disconnect and stow your zero delay lanyard. Next, check for proper operation of your oxygen system. As you reach for the emergency lever, make sure your hand goes in front of the throttles. Otherwise, your glove or sleeve could get caught on the canopy jettison T-handle. Last on the operations check is a check of the instruments. The engine, hydraulic, and load meters should be checked routinely throughout your sortie to ensure compliance with -1 limitations. Upon reaching your final cruise or maneuvering altitude, get the jet trimmed up and run through the operations check. Continue to run this check approximately every 15 minutes thereafter. The next check you'll do is the descent check. Normally, this portion of your flight is very busy, so you want to accomplish as much of this check as possible before you start your descent or leave your area. First, check your heading and attitude systems. Cross-check the RMI and J2 against the magnetic compass. They should agree ±5 degrees. If they don't, you need to actuate the fast slave cycle. During the fast slave cycle, you need to maintain a constant airspeed and heading for 3 minutes. If a turn becomes necessary, move the slaving switch to the out position, make a gentle turn and return the slaving switch to the center position at the completion of the turn. Check your attitude indicators to ensure both instruments indicate the proper flight attitude. If flight conditions are VMC and the attitude indicators aren't properly aligned, you may want to cage and adjust them or simply adjust the miniature aircraft for level flight. Now check the defroster and cockpit temperature are set as required. Use the defrost to preheat the windscreen if you've been cruising at high altitudes for an extended period of time, or if you will be making a rapid descent. This should keep the canopy from fogging up. The fuel quantity will be the next item you'll check. As you did with the operations check, check the total fuel, wing tank balance, and tank quantity. Continuing with the descent check, you'll check the hydraulic gauge for the correct pressure. If your aircraft has suffered a loss of hydraulic pressure, it is better to know about it now and take the appropriate actions rather than to discover a hydraulic loss after you've lowered the gear handle in the before landing check. The last three steps of the descent check are challenge and response. First, you'll need to connect your zero delay lanyard prior to the initial approach fix for penetration descent or prior to 10,000 feet pressure altitude during en route descent and challenge your IP. Next, set the current altimeter setting. It can be attained from ATIS or the local controlling agency. Challenge your IP to confirm their altimeter setting is also set. Lastly, ensure that your helmet visor is in the proper position. All aircrew members will use a visor from takeoff through the 10,000 foot check and after the descent check if sufficient light is available to permit proper vision. The next check you'll do is the before landing check. This check will keep you from landing with the wrong configuration. Always perform a before landing check to confirm you've properly configured the aircraft. Remember, since this check is normally done during critical phases of flight, you'll have to commit it to memory. First, make sure the speed brake switch is set as required for the type approach and landing you're flying. Next, lower the gear when below 150 knots. Confirm the gear are down and locked. You should have 3 green, no red light in the handle, and no gear warning horn. It is also a good idea to check your hydraulic pressure for a normal indication. Now challenge your instructor to confirm the gear are in the down position. This is one check you can't afford to forget. Now confirm the flap setting required for the type approach and landing you are doing. The correct indication on the gauge should confirm your flap setting if there are no unusual rolling tendencies of the aircraft. Confirming the flap setting with your instructor is also a mandatory challenge and response item. The last item of the before landing check is to lower the landing lights as required for the type of approach and landing you're doing when below 135 knots. Get in the habit of checking this item on all before landing checks, whether you use the landing light or not. As you're performing your before landing check, it is important to clear both outside the aircraft and on the radios. You need to be aware of the position of other aircraft and the effect of their position on you. At any time, you might need to break out or go around due to lack of proper spacing or a pattern conflict. The Dash 1 warns you to avoid wake turbulence. The T-37 is particularly susceptible to it. The vortex-produced rolling moment can exceed the aileron authority of the aircraft. Allow a minimum of 2 minutes before landing behind any larger type aircraft or helicopter and a minimum of 3 minutes behind any aircraft designated as a heavy in flip general planning. Attempt to remain above and upwind of the preceding aircraft's flight path. Last, keep in mind that wake turbulence will be most pronounced during conditions of calm or near calm surface winds. The last in-flight check is another one you'll have to commit to memory. You'll perform this check when you make the decision to go around or execute a missed approach. As soon as you make your decision, advance the throttles to military and ensure the speed brake switch is in. If the go-around decision was made very near the runway, touchdown may be unavoidable. Do not try and hold the aircraft off the runway. If you do happen to touch down, lower the nose slightly to help accelerate to takeoff airspeed. Then establish the takeoff attitude and allow the aircraft to fly off the runway. When you're sure you'll remain airborne, have confirmed that you're climbing and have a minimum of 100 knots, Raise the gear. Don't forget to check your landing lights at this point also. At 110 knots minimum, raise the flaps. Continue monitoring gear and flap retraction for normal indications. Now do a quick check of your engine instruments for normal indications. It's easy to get task saturated when working in the overhead pattern. However, it's important that you not forget to accomplish an operations check approximately every 15 minutes. You can establish a good habit pattern of running operations check every time you go around the outside downwind. There's plenty of time to run this check, but you must remember to continue clearing on the radios and outside your aircraft for other overhead traffic. To make a touch-and-go landing, perform the desired approach and landing, then perform normal go-around procedures. However, a word of warning, touch-and-go landings encompass all aspects of landing and takeoff procedures in a relative short time span. Be consistently alert for possible aircraft malfunction during these two critical phases of flight. Post-flight checks are the last of many checklist procedures you'll perform on each flight. The checks normally begin as you clear the runway onto the taxiway. After clearing the runway, comply with local directives to accomplish the after landing check. The first item of the after landing check directs you to confirm all your cockpit loose items are secured prior to opening the canopy and challenging your instructor for a response. Items such as navigation maps, pencils, checklists, and in-flight guides can fly out of the cockpit and into an engine if not properly stowed. Next, bring the aircraft to a complete stop or give control of the aircraft to your instructor as you install the seat and canopy jettison T-handle safety pins. Take care to install the jettison pin correctly. Is this pin being installed correctly? Yes, the straight portion of the pin is in the hole just forward of the T-handle and will safety the jettison system. Do not move the canopy jettison T-handle in an effort to insert the pin. Install your seat pin and ask your instructor to install his also. Do not move the hand grips to insert the pin. This could result in you inadvertently arming the ejection system. Ensure your instructor responds to your challenge. Next, check to ensure the speed brake switch is in the in position. This is the only item of the after landing check that can be accomplished on the landing roll. If you retracted the speed brake during the rollout, this would be a double check to ensure that it is up. Now direct your efforts to the right side of the cockpit. The IFF is no longer needed and should be turned off at this time. The VOR, ILS, and DME should also be placed in the off position. Moving across the bottom of the instrument panel, turn the pitot heat switch off so that the tube will be cooled by the time you reach the parking area. Next, set the landing lights according to local directives, generally to either taxi or off. Moving down from the landing lights, set the anti-collision beacons as required. Generally, place the switch to the off position. The position lights should be set to position lights only. Next, place the flap handle in the up position as directed by the last item in the after landing check. To ensure the flaps are retracting, check the flap indicator. As you taxi back to the chocks, you may want to check with your IP and shut down the ramp side engine. Prior to shutting down the engine, move the fuel system switch to emergency and check the EGT is stable. This ramp side engine shutdown procedure is often used for noise abatement. It also helps to slow down your taxi speed and reduce wear on the brakes. If an engine is shut down, check the hydraulic pressure. If you lose hydraulic pressure, stop the aircraft, shut down the other engine, and call for a tug and pins. If your hydraulic pressure is good, continue to the parking area. After you've stopped the aircraft, continue holding the brakes until the wheel chocks are installed. Now proceed with your engine shutdown checks. First, check that the EGT is stable and note any signs of roughness. Then place the fuel system switch to emergency position if it's not already there. Use the eyepiece throttles to shut down the engines. Lift up on his throttles and pull them back to the cutoff position. The engine ice warning light should illuminate after placing the left throttle to cutoff and before the left RPM reaches 0. If the light does not illuminate, write it up in the form 781. Next, install the seat and canopy jettison T-handle safety pins if not previously installed. Don't forget to challenge your IP on this item. Moving on with the next engine shutdown item, make sure the canopy rail is clear and move the downlock handle forward to the locked position. Coming back to the instrument panel, turn the radio off. The interior and exterior lights are next. They can be turned off at this time. Normally the position lights and taxi light will be the only exterior lights on at this time. If you've used any interior lights, now is the time to turn them off. Now reach up and cage and lock your attitude indicator. Ensure your IP does the same. Next, click the trim to the neutral position. You'll normally have to click the trim forward following a landing. The next two items to be turned off are the fuel boost pump and the inverter. The next item up is a challenge and response. Place the oxygen diluter lever in the 100% position to prevent the system from becoming contaminated while the aircraft is on the ground. Moving down to complete the last few items of the engine shutdown checklist, ensure the rudder pedals are neutral, then place the control lock into the position to lock the flight controls. Next, check that the crew chief has placed the wheel chocks around the main gear. Before you stand to leave the aircraft, make sure your gold key is secured on your parachute harness. Inadvertent deployment of your chute would ruin your whole day. Lastly, turn the battery off. There are a few items you should check before walking off. Check that the gear safety pins, grounding wire, and pitot tube is properly covered. One last warning as you leave the aircraft. Stand clear of tailpipes after engine shutdown and at all times when vapors exit from tailpipes. Danger to personnel exists because of explosive qualities of fuel vapors. You are now ready to do some paperwork. Your student workbook explains how to properly fill out the 781, so it will not be covered in this program. At this point, your responsibility for the aircraft is transferred and you may now leave the aircraft to the ground crew. Throughout your Air Force career, no matter what you fly, you'll be using in-flight checks that will help you safely accomplish the mission. Take the time now to develop proper checklist discipline and fly safe.